let us today look at, what should we do? Metal. There's been a few requests this week. Not requests, but a few people in group chat asking for a shader setup for metal. So we'll have a look at that. Now the thing about metal is really there is no one shader setup that'll suit everything, every application. I find it often better to make it. You can start with a base shader setup, but you're going to have to adapt it, adjust it to suit your needs. So let's talk about metal. Metal. Well, there are different kinds of metals. We all know that, you know. Some of you I know are making vehicles, motorcycles, that kind of thing. Some of you are making jewelry. But no matter what you're making, at some point you're going to want some kind of metal. So like I say, there are different kinds of metals. You can get, you know, kind of your steel and iron. Then you can go into things like copper and brass, and gold, which I suppose it could be grouped together because they're all from that kind of yellow metal family. Steel has a kind of a blue tint. Silver is more like silver and chrome kind of go together because they're more reflective. No colour in them at all. They just reflect like a mirror. So that's one of the reasons why there is no single setup for metal, because there's so many metals. Let's start. Let's see, for metal. Let's start with the UV sphere, and we'll start with something like a chrome, highly polished metal. So let me first of all start these little babies. They're working down there. Let's smooth this. Right, so let's go to a shader panel. And we're in viewport shading. Yep, that'll work. So let's first of all start adding a material to this. Okay. It can be done through the principled. Let's get rid of that for now so we understand better what's going on. A basic metal is a reflective surface. It has a base colour, such as, like, you know, gold will have a yellow, brass or copper will have like an orangey kind of colour. But a basic metal is made from a glossy shader. So let's put a glossy. Right. So here we go in viewport shading. We've got this kind of basic. Now the thing about metal is, depending on how polished it is, and that's going to depend on your application, it will depend how much it reflects, and we control the reflection with the roughness. The less roughness we got, the more reflection it reflects. So that would be a brightly polished chrome. Something like silver, you'd probably want something like that. And, you know, for a gold, you'd make that more kind of that colour. Alright, but this isn't going to render, because when we go to bake, we're going to also need something for that metal to reflect. You know, we could add lamps. Well, let's go ahead and do that. Let me add a plane here. Let me add a constraint to that plane. So it's pointing at the object we want, damp track constraint. We'll change that to Z and we'll pick up this sphere object. Let's add a material to this plane. Get rid of this and we'll add an emission shader. Plug that in. And if we go into a rendered view, we start to see some colour here. We'll need to adjust the lighting, obviously, per scene. So I want to bring this up. I also want to bring this out a bit, or scale it out a bit. Okay, so there's kind of a top length. Let me go to top view. Let me kind of grab this behind a bit. Let me duplicate this, bring it around the front. I'm bringing it further away so it's kind of less light. Duplicate that again and bring it over there. So let's have a look at what we've got going on here. Right, so we're showing a reflection from the 3 emission planes. Okay, if we bring that down, we see we got this reflection, but it's not very nice. That's because the whole environment is missing. You're going to see everything that's in the whole environment in metal. Now, when we're modeling, we don't model an entire city to render a vase or to bake a vase or a vase. Okay, so we're probably going to have to fake this. And if we come back, probably the best way to fake it is with a HDR. So if we're looking at this and increase the roughness a bit, that's looking more like a gold, the kind of gold you'd use on a piece of jewelry or something. And I would blur it to such a point that you can't see the details in what it's reflecting, but you know there's something there. So we need to add an environment. So how do we do that? Well, in our shader panel, let's change it from object to world, and we see we've got our world output and our background. Okay, and the background is reflecting this color here. So for example, if I was to brighten that color, you can see the background changing. Okay, and also the reflection on the ball changing, going lighter to darker and vice versa. Right, so we want to add an environment texture. So what I want to do is Shift A, add a texture and an environment texture. Okay, we can plug the color into the color. It's gone pink because there's no texture here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up, and I'm going to use one of the default textures that Blender comes with. So I'm going to open up, let's bring this across here. So C drive, program files, Blender Foundation, Blender 2.82, data files, studio lights, world, and we can see we've got our HDR textures here. And I think I'll choose this kind of forest park kind of one. The reason I'm going for this is there's no kind of really bright sunlight like this or this. It's got greens, or we could use interior. I'm going to use this one for now. So let me open that image. Alright, so now when we look at a ball, we see we're actually reflecting an environment around it. This HDR becomes very kind of distracting to me. So what I do is turn it off. I come to our render tab, come down to film, and click transparent. So I'm just looking at the ball. I'm not distracted by all this background. Right, so we can change our shader back to the object so we can work on the ball. Okay, so roughness is a little high. Let's turn it down a little bit. And like I say, my goal here is for a gold kind of color, or a gold shader. So, you know, obviously I'll turn it all the way down. That's going to look unnatural because most metals have surface scratches and things like that, you know, which will contribute to the roughness. So let's bring it up somewhere about there. Maybe about there. Now, no point in copying this figure exactly because it's going to depend on what HDR you use, what kind of object you got, and what you're looking for. You're going to have to make adjustments on the fly. We could also kind of play with the color a bit if we wanted more orange to make it kind of there. That's a little too much orange for me, I think. I'm going to bring it back towards the yellow. That's a bit better. Alright, so we've got this basic gold. How's this going to look on other objects? Well, let's add a couple of other objects. Let's add, well, we've got to add Suzanne, haven't we? So let's add a mesh monkey. Grab her there. Let's rotate her on the Z-axis so she's facing us. Rotate her on the X. Let's give her a little bit of subdivision. So modifiers, subdivision surface, turn the viewport up to 2, and shader smooth. And let's give her that same material. Right, let's go to render view. She's actually looking quite good there as a gold monkey. Quite happy with that, actually. You know, if I was baking, if I wanted a gold monkey head, I'd be quite happy with that. Right, so let's add something else. Let's add a cylinder. So we got a tube. So let's add a cylinder. Let's grab it on the x-axis. Let's scale it. Shift Z. I want to keep that height. And let's shade it smooth. And let's also give this the same material. Okay, that's looking pretty good. The ends aren't, because they're triangle. They're engons. All right. So let me just delete those for a minute. So X, delete face. And let's go into object mode. So that's looking a little bit better. Obviously there is no inside to this. This would be invisible in SL. I could add a solidify. So we've got an inside and an outside. Okay. And I probably want to delete this bottom face. Right. So that's looking a bit better. Alright. Now, where the problem's going to come is on flat surfaces. So let's add a plane. Grab it, put it down here somewhere, maybe scale it up a bit. And let's give this the same material. It's looking kind of okay there. But the thing about a flat surface is, I mean, if you're looking at that, it's looking completely different from these. Flat surfaces really don't work well with metals. Let me delete that plane for a minute and let me add a cube. GX. And let's add that same material. You see where we're getting, you know, loads of reflections here. We're getting hardly any on flat surfaces. So flat surfaces really, really do not work well with metal, especially when baking. We need to add a bit of kind of definition to them. So let's say, for example, we were making a frame for, I don't know, a chair or table or something made out of metal. Well, let's actually change this more to a white. Okay, as you know, a chrome table leg or chair leg might be. We're not seeing very good here. So, edit mode. First of all, what I'm going to do is just delete these top and bottom surfaces. So I'm just basically working as if it were a tube. A square tube. Right. Doesn't really work well. One thing we can do, let's go into edge mode and select these 4 edges. We can bevel the edges to add some curve, to add some variation in that surface. So Control B. Let's bevel. You start to see we're picking up some of this other detail and it's looking a lot better than what it was. Okay, but we're adding lots of geometry there. But what we can do, let me Control Z backwards. There we go. We can keep this as a base model. We can make a copy of it. Well, actually, let's do that. So Shift D, we've got a copy there. Gee, well, I just got to line these up a little bit better together. We got a copy there. So with the copy, we could bevel those corners. Okay, let's come back to object mode. Let's shade that smooth. We could bake this higher poly texture with the same unwrap because it was made from this, and then apply this texture to this square tube, and it will look a lot similar, a lot more like this. And you can see how we can add the detail in with a high poly texture to a low poly cube, and that will look much better than that will. Okay, now the other thing about metal is you'll probably see lots of white dots everywhere, fireflies, and this is a problem with glossy surfaces. You will create fireflies and your textures look awful. Right, there's only one way, well, there's a couple of ways to fix fireflies, but the basic thing with fireflies is when you're getting fireflies, you run out of samples. You haven't got enough samples to get rid of these overblown, overexposed pixels. So you need to up your samples, okay? Now we're only at 32, so I would expect a lot of fireflies on this glossy stuff. Okay, let me try this at 500. And we'll wait for this to render up, and you should see some of these white dots start to disappear. You certainly see kind of down here and on here. Okay, that's looking a bit better, but I'm still seeing some. So 500 really isn't enough. You're going to have to ramp it up to get some better results out of that. Okay, but the trouble with ramping up the sampling is every time you increase samples, you're going to increase your texture bake times. Okay, so this is one of the problems with metals. To get a good clean image, we need to up the samples, but in upping the samples, we're going to greatly increase our baking times, but that's just something we've got to live with. Okay, it's looking a lot cleaner, but it's still not clean. I personally, if I was doing a metal, would I'd sample at around about 2,500, 3,000, which does add for some very long bake times, but that's the compromise I've got to make to get a good looking metal. Okay, so that is a kind of a basic metal shader, which all it is a glossy and a material output, but you're going to be dependent a lot on your lighting, and just want to try something here. That's cube 01. Right, so I'm going to change my object constraint here to the other one. So change up from sphere. Let's pick up this one. Okay, see the lighting on the flat hasn't really changed that much on the flat surfaces. But anyway, where was I? You're going to have to set up a good environment for metal. You know, so it's got something to reflect and good lighting to get what you want. Not an easy thing to do, metals. It's, you know, it's not hard, but it's not the easiest thing to do.